Hi, welcome to Emergency Calling in Microsoft Teams, part of the Virtual Hub series. Might be wondering who I am. My name is Anthony Carrigal. I'm a Office Apps and Services MVP, really focused on Microsoft Teams, but specifically voice. Before that, I was a Skype for Business MVP. Before that, I was a Link MVP. I've been around a little bit. I'm a UC consulting lead for BDO Digital. We're a partner out of, my office is based out of Chicagoland, although we are national. I am voice focused, although I do just about everything you can do with Teams. My passion's really around voice, so I tend to talk about that a lot more when you see me out there talking. I'm a tool writer, and what that means is basically anything you can see that's maybe only surfaceable in PowerShell, that might be kind of cumbersome to people who aren't that great with PowerShell. I like to write little GUI front ends to it, so just tapping on a front end little form or something might be a lot easier than trying to memorize or bring up your notes with all the PowerShell commands. So you might see me doing a lot of that. And if you follow me at Twitter, you'll probably see me posting about what I've done recently about that, what tools I've released, or just chattering in general. So what are we talking about today? When we're talking about emergency services, what we're really talking about is anywhere around the world, anybody who's trying to get a hold of emergency services, meaning the police, the fire department, ambulances, any other emergency services you may call, that's what we're talking about, is getting from Teams to these services in a safe and effective manner. I tend to walk into a lot of organizations where we're replacing old PBX systems, and a lot of them just shrug and they say, why bother? The fine if we might get is only a few $100s. If we find out we're not really compliant, it's not a big deal. Nobody cares. The police are just going to come to the front door anyway. We don't have to be that specific. And the real reason, to bother, to care, is not just legal compliance, because you do want to follow the laws. You want to follow the laws of your region, but other things. There's lawsuits. For example, if somebody seriously gets hurt and they find out that you could have done more, or you should have done more by the law, then you're opening up your firm to liability. But even beyond that, just because people matter, you don't want anybody to get hurt. And if somebody does get hurt, you want to make sure that they get the help as fast as possible. So that's really what we're trying to accomplish today. So where does this apply? Pretty much every country has some specialized emergency number. Now, there's different laws for different countries. They all have their own laws, but America typically ends up being one of the most complex. So I will spend a bit of time talking about how America does it, especially for those of you who are doing these deployments internationally. So let's kind of talk about the world versus the U.S. Like I said, many countries, they just have they just require a static location per phone number, meaning that if you're making a call to emergency services, they just need to know for that phone number, what address are you most likely to be at? Most likely. Now, America has varying federal laws and state laws. Well, federal laws don't vary, but the state laws can vary state to state. Some states having almost no requirements. They don't really care, just whatever the federal government says. But others have very specific laws that are a lot more granular and a lot more specific than what the federal government says. As far as federal laws in the United States, we've got Carrie's Law, and that went into effect this year, actually, in 2020. Where we can't have to dial a 9 before dialing 911. So a lot of phone systems, you need to dial 789 to get out, and we can't have that. You have to just be able to dial 911 to get out. On top of that, you have to have some kind of designated personnel. We're not real specific on who that personnel is, but typically a local employee. We need some kind of notification that somebody actually placed a call to 911. Now, that notification can be a call, email, chat. There's different ways of notifying, but we do need to send some kind of notification. So to be compliant, we're going to have to make sure that we can dial 911 without any other prefixes or anything, and that somebody gets a notification of this call. Coming into effect is Ray-Baum's Act. This is really saying wired or fixed telephony devices, mostly desk phones. We're going to require this in early 2021, and wireless is 2022. Now, those dates may change. We'll see. There's a lot going on right now. So, but in general, it's just saying that we need to provide some kind of dispatchable location so that the first responders, the emergency services, can actually get there. So That might include the street address, but it might also include some more granular information as well. In general, you want to try to locate as precisely as you can without being overwhelming your IT department with every time a network cable changes, you have to go change a 911 location. That can be cumbersome, or a emergency services location. Some examples of some state laws, just to kind of show you how complex this is. In Illinois, where I live, we have to be able to locate right to the street address and within 40,000 square feet. So I've got a few clients out there. I've got one client I'm thinking of right now. It's got 900,000 square foot warehouses. So we have to subdivide that into tiny little quadrants or tiny little sections. And if there's a phone in that area, we have to locate it right to that tiny little section. Again, of course, that doesn't really matter a whole lot to the police because the police are just going to show up to the front door. There's no way that they can arrive right to that section of the warehouse, nor would they even necessarily know what that means. But when we tell the front desk, the reception, the emergency medical team where that call was placed in 911, they're going to know where it is, and they're going to be able to get there and be able to help quickly. Michigan may have to locate right down to 7,000 square feet. That's about 650 square meters, which is a very, very small area. So again, different states, different laws. But you go over to Wisconsin, right above Illinois, and they don't really have any specific legislation whatsoever. So again, in general, you want to try to locate as specifically as feasible and as possible, but you also have to be very aware of the law and what your requirements are. Emergency calling behavior can vary based on if you're using calling plans or direct routing. So in the USA, again, calls with a static address assigned to it, so we don't have any kind of more sophisticated dynamic location services set up in Teams just yet. We just gave it a calling plan and a phone number. Here you go. You're using Teams and you're making a 911 call. Before you assign a phone number, you have to assign an emergency address. So what actually happens when you call 911 is that call will be intercepted by a 911 operator. Say, hey, are you really calling from this address? If so, it will be delivered there. If you're just choking, they'll deliver it there anyway. But they're going to make sure that you're really calling from there and you're not calling from home because maybe you're in the middle of a pandemic or something. If you do have a matching dynamic location set, so we know exactly where you are because you've programmed all of that into Teams, so there's no question about where you are, then we can deliver it right to the correct emergency dispatch with 0 interceptions. Outside of the US, we're pretty much going to deliver it based on the static location specified as far as calling plans are concerned. Now, when we get into direct routing, it's a little bit different. So if we have dynamic emergency calling configured, meaning that we've said, okay, this location matches this set of networking information, we configured that in Teams, so maybe this subnet is for the second floor of that building over there, then we can have a routing policy or emergency call routing policy assigned directly to that location. Further than that, if we assign an ELIN number, which is an emergency location identification number, basically just a phone number that matches that location. If we add that to the Teams location, then our local gateway has to know what to do with that. So Teams will include that information when it gets sent to our local session border controller through the emergency call routing policy, and we'll have to know what to do with that. And what we will need to do with that is make sure that that gets to the police with the proper location. We might talk about that a little bit later. But if nothing's configured, maybe you've got a tiny office, it's direct routing, there's 5 people in it, it's a single location. The call's pretty much just going to be routed to the gateway using whatever default policy, and that call's just going to get to the local police. So we'll talk a little bit about when we're using direct routing, how do we know what 911 location to get to, what emergency location that we need to get to. And I'm sorry I keep saying 911, I know not everybody here is from the US. There's a few different ways. So one is called PIDF-LO, which is Presence Information Data Format Location Object. And basically what that is somebody places an emergency call. We have all the location information programmed into Teams. And what we do is we can actually send that almost like it's pretty much an XML format that gets included with the SIP packets that get sent to your session border controller. Now, if you have your telco, your telephone company understands that kind of that next generation emergency calling format, great, they're going to be able to handle that. Not a lot do, but several do, and it's often a premium service. So if you have it, that's just going to be your best bet. Let's talk about emergency location identification numbers again. So for carriers not accepting the PIDF-LO stuff, we might want to have an ELIN gateway. So again, ELIN's the phone number that we assign to a specific location. And basically what an ELIN gateway does is the 911 call comes from Teams. It has the emergency call header. It's got the ELIN number associated with it. So your ELIN gateway, which is your session border controller, is going to call the emergency dispatch, and it's going to mask the call with that ELIN number. So your caller ID actually looks like this ELIN number, not your own personal phone number. What happens then is that phone number should you should have already told your telco that phone number matches that location, maybe the 3rd floor west wing of that building address. And the police will see the proper location. They won't see your phone number, but they'll see a phone number with the proper location, so they can get the police to you right away, or ambulance, or whatever you need. But at the same time, should that call drop and they call back, your ELIN gateway is responsible for saying, okay, we got this inbound call for this ELIN number. However, we know that call was really coming from Dave, so we're going to translate it back in reverse and send it back to Dave's phone should 911 or your emergency services in your area call back. Let's talk about how we get this all set up inside of Microsoft Teams, because that's kind of the basic concept of it, but let's talk about how we get this configured and set up. Should we use Admin Center or PowerShell? Realistically, both. Microsoft's done a great job of surfacing all of this in the Admin Center, and there's really not much you can't do in the Admin Center now. I think you can pretty much do everything in the Admin Center. But anytime you're going to make large or bulk changes, you have to import a ton of locations or a ton of different subnets or networking information to be able to locate where everybody is. It's always better in PowerShell. With that, we're going to kind of talk about both sides of it. So the first thing we're going to want to really do is kind of map out our locations. So these are our civic addresses and our locations. When we're talking about a civic address, we're really talking about a street address that's kind of unique, but not necessarily a floor or anything like that. When we talk about, okay, we've got this street address and that's our civic address, we might have multiple locations for that civic address. So like 1st floor, 2nd floor, 3rd floor, east wing, west wing, whatever you do, however tightly you want to subdivide it. You could even do it right down to Office 405, Office 407, Conference Room B, whatever you want to do. As granular as you need to be to get that. So you can go into Teams, go into Locations, Emergency Addresses, and define all of this. Again, if you want to use PowerShell, you can do that as well. One of the things that we have in here, the latitude and longitude, you will need to determine that and program that in. And this is one of those cases where Admin Center is better for that, because it will kind of automatically look up latitude and longitude for you. But if you're using PowerShell, you can use Bing Maps or whatever to determine the latitude and longitude and program that in yourself with PowerShell. From there, we need to take all of our networking information and upload it. So we've got all our locations, but we don't really know where you are, or how do we know which location you're actually in? Because you might be working from Office A one day and Office B the next day, and we need to be able to dynamically locate you. It doesn't matter what your phone number is. We have to know where you are based on where you're physically at. So your emergency calling location is going to change on you. So we can do that by specifying subnets, switches, things of that nature. Right now, subnets and wireless access points are supported. Switches and ports are soon supported. But what we can basically do is to say, okay, if you're in this subnet, we know you're in this building on that floor. If you're on that subnet, we know you're in that building on that floor. And if you're using this wireless access point, and with that we specify the BSS ID, which is almost like a unique address per access point. So it's not just the network. So it doesn't matter if your entire Wi-Fi across all buildings is called Contoso. We can locate you actually to the to the specific access point that your computer connected to, and we can set a location for that. So we can then take this network information that we program in and tie them to the individual locations, the civic addresses and the locations that we've specified. One of the things we want to do, let's say we're doing subnets and our subnet is 192.168.1. whatever, and that's something that a lot of people are going to have at home on their home Wi-Fi routers too. How do we tell the difference between whether I'm at home using 192.168.1. my personal network, or I'm at the office using their 192.168.1? And that's done by setting trusted tenant addresses. So none of this actually comes into effect unless your your computer is talking to Teams through a trusted IP address. So we can specify that. We see new CS trusted IP address, PowerShell command. Then we basically say, all right, this is one of our public IP blocks. So this is the NAT that I'm coming from behind the firewall at my office. Or if I'm coming from one of these IP addresses, public IP addresses that my company owns, then we know that I'm actually physically on the premises of my company. If I'm coming from anything else, then I'm probably at home, I'm at a Starbucks, I'm somewhere else. So we don't need to bother to apply all this location information. We can also program this in from the admin center. Again, it's really up to you as far as how detailed you want to be and how much information that you have to import, whether you're going to do this through the admin center or through PowerShell. But again, anything you want to do is right there. So locations, networks, and locations, you can program in your subnets, your Wi-Fi access points, your switches, and your ports. Switches and ports require LLDP med configured, and that can be a little bit much for some people. I know everybody would love to just be able to say, okay, this is the office that person's making a call from, but you have to be aware if you're going to that level, if you're programming it right to the port level to locate them for emergency calling, you can't just have a junior network admin switch a cable later because they might change the entire 911 location or the emergency calling location, which in turn invites a whole lot of process into your network cabling as well. So be as granular as makes sense for your organization, but be aware that if you're too granular beyond what makes sense, then you've added a whole lot of process to just moving a simple Cat5 cable around. So back to the, let's look back at the network topology. We've set up our physical network, our network locations, our wireless access points. We've tied them to our civic addresses. But we also want to kind of define a higher level network topology. So what we can do is we can pick a region and then set that to a corresponding site. So we can have multiple sites tied to a region and multiple subnets tied to those sites. So we can have different policies based on the subnets and the sites and the regions you're in. So we can kind of group you that way. So that's actually, instead of being done through networks and locations where we set up our subnets and our access points, we set up our sites and our topology under network topology. Again, I kind of find it easier to do this through the admin center, and you typically have a few less of these. It's a lot less complex than entering in a million Wi-Fi access point BSS IDs. So I do kind of prefer admin center for this, but again, wherever you are. So you can set up your network sites here, and then the trusted IPs that we talked about a minute ago, where we said, okay, we know we're coming from an office, not a Starbucks, based on the public IP address that Teams is using. That can also be set on this page. And here, of course, where we can do this all through PowerShell, new CS tenant network regions, sites, and the subnets that we assign to it. And these subnets are different from the location subnets that we set up before to map you to civic addresses. So we set up those network locations so that we can apply policies to them. So when we're setting up our regions and our sites and all that. If we're using Microsoft calling plans, and this is pretty much handled for you automatically, but if we're using direct routing, we're going to make sure we need to have these Teams emergency numbers and the call routing policies automatically. So in my case, we might be creating a new Teams emergency number for 911 because I am US based, or maybe the office I'm working on is US based. We'll have an emergency dial mask. So I've got it set so that you can either dial 911 or 9911. Either is going to work. And the reason I might have you dial 9911 is because in the past, maybe the users that the old phone system, they had to do that. And if they're panicked, they may just dial that instead because they don't quite remember. That's fine. But then we can set up our PSTN usage. So we're saying, hey, we're going through this direct routing session border controller using this profile. And then what we can do is we can create an emergency call routing policy and basically set that up for all those branches, all those in our tenant, all the emergency numbers in all of our US branches. Again, here's the PowerShell equivalent of all that. Just set up our call routing policies. Basically, when somebody makes the emergency call, how do we know it's an emergency call? What phone number would they have dialed to signify that it's an emergency call? And then where are we going to send it? What session border controller? We can then set up our emergency calling policies. So previously we were talking call routing policies, what session border controller, how are we getting it out, how are we getting it to the police. But the emergency calling policies actually kind of satisfies the U.S. carries law, where we can notify somebody that the alert's been, or that a 911 or an emergency call has been placed. So with that, we can create our emergency policy. We can create a notification group, maybe a group of people, or specify some individual people, so that when a emergency call is placed, they get a Teams group chat letting them know who placed the call and from what address, from what location we've specified. You can then, whoever has received that, they can actually be typing back and forth in that chat, like, hey, did you really mean to place that emergency call? Are you hurt? Do you need us to send somebody over? Or maybe they can just see it and rush right over. So they'll get that alert, and that satisfies Carey's law. We also have the ability to actually conference in other people. So if we have our own maybe nurse's office or medical office, emergency response team, we can conference them in as well with the options so that they can listen but not speak, or listen to the emergency call and assist as well, maybe give additional directions if somebody's having trouble because they're very hurt. To do that to the PowerShell, we can, oh, I guess we've set this up, but now we want to maybe grant that to an individual user. So we might want to say, okay, that policy, that calling policy, we're going to grant that to the user. So if that person's hurt, we want to notify a specific person. We've got a specific policy for them, or maybe we want to set it for the entire network site. So maybe we've got 3 offices in Illinois, and we want all these people notified for Illinois when somebody in Illinois makes that emergency call. Or maybe we just want to do it office by office. Make sure reception is always notified when somebody makes that call, so they can see who it is, where they're calling from, so when the emergency services do arrive, they can run them right over to that desk. So I wanted to throw a couple of little extra credit pieces in here, little fun facts. One of them is, if you're using calling plans and you're in the US, when you want to make a 911 call, you want to test it. You want to make sure all your locations and everything's working. Typically what you might have to do is you might want to call the non-emergency services number first. You call the police first, and you let them know you're going to be making that test 911 call, and they'll tell you the instructions, or they'll say, hey, not now, we're really busy. Or if you're in a really busy city like Chicago or Washington, D.C., they might say, all right, we're going to schedule you that test call, and you can call it 2 Tuesdays from now at 3 in the morning, but not after 3:15. So they can do, they can have like crazy schedules like that. So the fun thing is, if you're using calling plans, you actually can dial 933 and a bot will answer. So you can test all of this stuff out without actually bothering 911. Make sure you've got it set up properly before you harass the police and find out that it didn't work, or you misprogrammed something, and then you have to schedule it all over again. The bot will actually reply with the location that it found, and you'll get the all the notification stuff that you need to make sure this is properly configured. Another fun thing that I've done for a few clients is, if you're sending the calls through the gateway, you know, you've got that ELIN gateway that we were talking about. So you're using direct routing. You're sending emergency calls through your own gateway, your own session border controller. But maybe you want a little bit something more advanced than what's built in. What we've done at a few clients is they've had syslog services for other services. So they may send all their switching information and other things. They have a general syslog server, which can create triggers. So what we can do is we can send the syslogs from the session border controller over to the server and create triggers. So if a 911 call is placed, we can also use that to trigger our own programs to enable functionality like pop-ups, audible alerts, and things of that nature. So we can go even more sophisticated than just maybe a group chat or something like that, without actually having to pay for maybe a very expensive, sophisticated services. So with that, I know that was a little complex, and I tend to run through things fast. But if you do have any questions, if I said anything, if I'm just wrong about anything that you think, or you want to call me out, or you maybe didn't hear enough about your country, or maybe you want to give me a little information about how it may work in your country, please ping me on Twitter at canthonycarrigal.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn just the same way. Just reach out to me. Let me know what you thought. Let me know if you want a copy of the deck. Let me know anything I can help you with, or anything I can correct. But I just wanted to thank you for your time today, and let you know I appreciate you. Have a good day.